Hey guys, what's up? Sando here. Another day, another topping DAC review. But in all honesty, you shouldn't skip this one, as D70S MQA is really a feature-packed device that sounds like no other topping DAC ever released so far. It's a pseudo-flagship device that feels mostly like a sidestep rather than like a lower-tier device to the D90 MQA. It goes for $650 and I consider it a steal. And here is why. In terms of build quality, it has a thicker aluminum case to the D90, which I like, with just two plates attached on its front and back. CNC machining looks top-notch, its anodizing surface seems to be scratch resistant, and you shouldn't worry too much while operating audio gear around it. Its silicone feet were placed in small cutouts in the case itself, so no matter how often you drag it around your table with an amplifier on top, those will always stay put. While it is slightly bigger and heavier to D90, it has a small footprint and can be easily integrated into tight spaces as office desk or headphone setups. At about 1.9 kilos or 4.2 pounds, D70S is nor heavy nor lightweight, but gives an impression of a well-engineered and well-made product. Topping always cared for the look and build quality of their gear, and that can be immediately felt while touching and closely inspecting the unit. As for controls, it has a clean-looking front panel with just an on-off button on the left, a monochrome OLED screen in the middle, two volume buttons, and an input selector can be found on the right. On the back, all the nicer digital inputs are present as USB, I2S, optical, coaxial, AAC, and there is also a Bluetooth antenna socket. Being a fully balanced DAC, it offers a pair of XLR and RCA outputs. Both are volume controllable or fixed, depending on the settings, and you can even disable a pair of analog outputs if you want. As for the tech inside it, topping went with the second best DAC chip of IEM, the famous 4497, but with a lot of tinkering and by using two pieces of the same silicon, they were able to achieve a better channel separation and a lower noise floor even compared to the IEM reference boards, which is impressive to say the least. Since 4497 is not a current output DAC chip as 4499 is, an IV conversion stage wasn't necessary as it was on D90, completely dropping 4 op-amps for a purer and a shorter signal path. However, its output stage is based on 3 OPA 1612 op-amps that are very different to the ones installed on the D90 MQA. OPA 1612 is very well known to me and it's considered as one of the smoothest and natural sounding op-amps, which already tries to tell a small story about its sound. Everything else, and I mean absolutely everything, remains on the same level with D90 MQA. You can find the same Accu-Silicon femtoclocks, Altera FPGA, Nikon audio grade caps, XMOS USB receiver, SPDIF receiver, full MQA decoder, and the best Bluetooth chipset that supports all the nicest codecs. Before going deep into its performance, I have several tips to share with you that will help you achieve the best sound quality out of your D70S MQA. Turn it off first with the switch on the back, press and hold the select button and turn the switch to on position and a menu like this will appear. If you are using it in a headphone setup or if you already own a dedicated preamp in a loudspeaker setup, I strongly recommend disabling the preamp mode, that is the setting number 3. If you use just a single analog output, be it RCA or XLR, and don't use the second one, I recommend disabling the second output, that's the setting number 4. If you don't plan on using its Bluetooth input, or maybe you'll use it just casually, then I recommend disabling the Bluetooth module, it's the setting number 5. Lastly, if you check its user manual where you can find measurements for those 6 digital filters, out of them, filter 3 and filter 4 have the lowest ringing past 20 kHz, and this is precisely why I recommend using filter number 3 for a smoother top end, or filter number 4 for more treble presence. And if you plan on using the D70S in a speaker setup as a DAC plus preamplifier unit, just skip the first recommendation. Okay everyone, let's hit some eardrums. In terms of sound performance, after a full week of burning, I finally sat down for a longer listening session. And the first impression that I've made about the D70S is that it sounds really toy tapping, really engaging, much smoother, much more natural sounding, even compared to my own reference DAC, which, mind you, is a lot more expensive than this one. Even D90 didn't feel as liquid, as easygoing, as smooth as D70S was. In all fairness, D70S reminds me quite a lot about the sound of R2R ladder DACs than to those super technical, super sharp sounding Delta Sigma modulation DACs. It has this smoothness that is really those natural textures that is quite difficult to express by words. D70S felt like drinking mulled wine on a super cold day, so it has that warmth that is coming from within, that smoothness, that liquidity that you normally don't find with regular DACs. It also has to do with natural rendition of textures. Sometimes I feel that there is no digital to analog conversion happening in real time, as it simply sounds like real music and not like a reproduction of that music. In a headphone setup, it was connected to a drier and to a much more linear sounding benchmark HPA4, and yet the final outcome wasn't dry at all. On the contrary, it was again smooth sounding. Music was flowing like a river, and it was putting me into a very relaxed state of mind. D70S is quite unlike any other DAC topping made so far, because it reminds me quite a lot about the smoothness and liquidity of E30 and D70, but everything else is simply dialed up to 11. And while I find it speedy, it is not exactly lightning fast as my reference DAC. Instead, it focuses on delivering a stronger kick into my chest. Slump performance is really good, and it's easily on the same level with D90. I decided using it more often in my loudspeaker setup, and I'm very glad that topping raised that voltage from 4 volt to 5 volts on its XLR and from 2 volt to 2.5 volt on its RCA output, as that works much better with power amplifiers. But if you want the absolute best, of course, you will need some dedicated preamplifiers like topping pre-90 for the absolute best results. I'll be comparing the D70S with D90 at later stages of this review, but even right now, without a preamplifier in my chain, with my loudspeakers, D70S sounded simply warmer in the mid-range, much more bolder in the bass. It had a bigger soundstage, it was more airy sounding, more holographic, much more 3D, nicer pinpoint imaging. The difference wasn't that huge, but it was enough to be felt with my KF reference 3 and of course with my 36 old ears. But when I have added a topping pre-90 in my chain, I pretty much arrived at close to maximum those speakers and my room could possibly achieve. So driver control was simply better, especially the bass felt much more controlled. The image was sharper, much more cleaner, and the depth was deeper, like the sounds were coming from behind that wall. So topping D70S together with topping pre-90 are costing just a very small fraction of what I'm normally listening to in my loudspeaker setup, AudioByte Hydrovox and benchmark HPA4, but the final outcome is really not that far off, if being completely honest with you. And in a less revealing setup, I would be really hard-pressed telling which is which is again kind of impressive. So D70S is clearly not addressing veteran audiophiles that are ready to shell some serious amounts of cash for a minimal increase of performance, but a newer generation that wants to squeeze the highest performance with the lowest amount of cash, and in this regard, D70S seems like a no-brainer device to me. In terms of noise floor, this will be a slightly shorter part, as there is no other way in saying it that D70S is simply noiseless and really inaudible when it comes to noise floor. So I connected a benchmark HPA4 to it and then some ultra-sensitive IEMs, and of course I didn't spot any noise whatsoever. And the same can be said about my loudspeaker setup. I went slightly higher, so past 95 dB, and that's quite a lot in this apartment, and I cannot hear anything really. I went as far and approached those speakers with my ears, and all I've heard was simply the sound of silence. Background noise is simply nowhere to be found. It was as black as it could possibly be, and no matter what transducer I would use, I knew that I can always rely on its clean and noiseless performance. As for transient response, After listening to several days to D70S in a loudspeaker setup and then moving it back to a headphone setup, I always had this feeling that it offers a smoother ride, so with notes fading away just a little bit longer to what I am familiar with my reference DAC. I simply had more time to experience those guitar plucks, those violin vibrations. Even cymbal hits simply had more shimmering to them, so that worked really well with acoustic music, with old and new jazz, with classical music. I simply wanted to feel those vibrations, and D70S offered that to me. I started listening to Wolf Totem by The Who, which is always a blood-boiling experience for me. Please try them as well. Quite interesting band when it comes to Transient Response. And the combination of that throat singing, those magical sounding horse head fiddle, and those amazing drums created some chest pounding moments that I will not forget very soon. I observed that D70S can move bigger amounts of air in an instant and deliver that really mercifully. While with some lightning fast electronica, D70S wasn't as exceptional as D90 or Matrix Element X was. It was impressive when it came to landing punches at the right moment. And indeed, D70S is more about the kick than about the speed, and I'm fine with that. As for the Soundstage, finally we have arrived to the centerpiece of what is making topping D70S truly special, as even without any kind of burn-in, even from the first day of listening, it was smooth sounding but also very wide open, very holographic sounding, ethereal sounding. It was really amazing in terms of soundstage. And literally all AKM designs are sounding very good in here, but double AKM designs, that is something entirely else, my friends. Basically on the same level with some of the best art warladder DACs that I have experienced so far, like Dana Fripp's Venus or Audio GD R7. And I'm yet to hear double AKM designs that isn't that impressive in terms of scale. That will probably never happen. D90 was already impressive in terms of scale, as it sounded as one of the widest AKM-based DAC I had experienced so far, yet D70S is somehow better at this. It excels with live music, with acoustic music, and will be always throwing a bigger picture in front of the listener. Moving on to the frequency response, I'm hearing bass notes reaching easily sub-bass territory, and not only with my electronica tracks, but also with dark folk, with my jazz tunes. It's also powerful in there, but clean and really undistorted, with layers and sub-layers of information. It is hard slumming exactly how D90 is, but it's a little bit more focused on the mid-bass territory. And about that, D70S is extremely potent in here. It a little bit elevates that mid-bass section. It is a bit fuller than D90 in here, and a lot fuller sounding than regular ESS Sabre DACs. Midrange is easily the best part of this device when it comes to frequency response, and most of your attention will be drawn exactly in this region. And no matter what I was playing, it would make that a little bit sweeter, smoother sounding and warmer sounding. And that's right, folks, D70S is what I would call a warm sounding source. And while it doesn't roll off anything in the frequency response, I think that its mid-range section is really amazing and is standing out very often. Acoustic instruments felt real, voices felt alive. I really like the added weight that it brought to the table, as everything that was linear shifted into smooth and engaging, and everything that was bright became neutral and easygoing. Treble is also quite interesting because it reaches easily the top octave. It goes sky high, it's clean, it's defined, but you'll not find that treble ringing that you normally can experience with Delta Sigma modulation DACs. There is actually quite a lot of art warladder goodness in here. That invisible silk that is binding all those notes together, creating music, smoother music, liquidity and so on. With all that said, I didn't experience any kind of treble roll-off. My usual rock tracks, my usual metal music still sounded raw and unpolished, but easier to swallow in long listening sessions. You'll not find signs of brightness and digitus in here, as D70S is more about emotions than about metallic trebles. I have also compared it with its bigger brother topping D90 MQA, But since I'm not into long and boring reviews, please check out my detailed comparison that I put below. It's on chapter 10 and it's one click away. As for the conclusions, Topping took their best DAC and used this technology to create a much more affordable unit like D70S MQA. The problem is they used so much technology that it no longer felt like being part of the D70 line, but more like a D80 line, if you know what I mean. There isn't a feature that D70S MQA doesn't have compared to D90 MQA, and that might cannibalize the sales of the D90 line in the future. D70S came so close to the performance of the D90 that sometimes I was hard-pressed finding any differences whatsoever with less than perfect recordings. It felt indeed like a pseudo-flagship device to me than like a lower-tier device, and that makes D70S an absolute steal by today's standards. And if I think about it, I don't know any other DAC that has the same functionalities and performs as good at $650. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. My full in-depth review is waiting on my website. In case you want to support this channel, please subscribe to it. And as usual, listen to my music, be positive, and I'll see you soon. Cheers! Bye bye!